Welcome to GPT, Grace People's Talk, and this is going to be the second episode on the woman at the well. And if you have not watched the first episode, please do see that. So we were talking about how Christ approached a sinner and how the sinner wanted to evade that particular conversation and talk about another conversation. So man's defense mechanism and Christ approach was the first episode, and this episode is going to be a continuation towards that. Uh, so here we will look at the similarities between Nicodemus and the woman at the well. In the earlier episode, we saw the contrast between the woman at the well and Nicodemus. Now we will see the similarities. Uh, One is Nicodemus had a reputation and he wanted to protect his reputation, and he came in the middle of the night to look for Jesus and hear something from him. Whereas this lady did not have a reputation and he didn't want to be reminded of the damaged reputation, and she was at the well in the noon of the day. So one thing common between these two is both did not know they were lost. And when Christ was speaking to him, Nicodemus, as a religious, moral, intellectual man, did not know he was lost. And when Christ was speaking to her, she being religious, immoral, and a superstitious lady, she did not know she was lost. And the second similarity is both were living in the physical reality. When Christ was talking about you must be born again, and Nicodemus could not see the spiritual side behind to it. And he was limited because of his physical reality thinking. And he was saying, how can a man go back to mother's womb and come back? And similarly, when Christ was speaking to the lady about the living water, and she also could not uh, think the spiritual side behind it. And she was saying that the well is deep and you don't have a bucket. How would you draw the water? And I was reading, and I kind of like saw that the natural man, as Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 14, cannot understand the things of the spirit, and for they are spiritually discerned. So that is the second similarity that I saw. And the third one is they both were empty spiritually, and the greatest need to be born again and to be saved, and they did not know. Uh, like C.S. Lewis says in one of the book that there is a rich businessman and who left the business because of the girl whom he loved, and he went after her, and he makes a statement to that lady. I am unhappy and you are unhappy, but we don't know why we are unhappy. And they both were spiritually empty, but they did not know the reason behind it. This conversation could happen between a husband and wife. I am unhappy, you are unhappy, but we don't know why we are unhappy. This could be the conversation between two youths, and this could also be the conversation between two friends. And all that I can see is that Christ was ministering salvation to these people. And it is a beautiful story, and it is a beautiful um, initiation from Christ to this lady. And that is what we are here to talk about it. And I am Pastor Guru, and with me is my wife, Nalini.
Hi. Yes, Guru. I was even thinking that, there is a theme that Christ is drawing here. And what amazed me when I was reading Samaritan women's story is, there are so many, deep principles that he brings out, and one of the things that he says is about worship. And there he says the Father is seeking, a certain kind of worshippers. So this really made me to ponder and ask God, like, who is a worshiper and things like that. So, it's just a small illustrative case. I just thought of, it was God who gave this idea, but I thought, like, if I say this is the object of worship, and here is the worshiper, and the worshiper displays his or her gratitude or whatever towards the object of worship in a certain act. I was just thinking, like, what, when Christ is talking to that woman, he says the object of worship you do not know. The Samaritans never knew the object of worship. Because the Bible also says that, they are half Jews, so they really inculcated so many practices where, what, the person who deserves to be worshipped is not the one true God. It could be an idol or whatever they brought in, that is what they were worshiping. The Samaritans were doing that. So that's when Christ had to say to her, you do not know whom you worship. But Jews know whom they worship, because they knew that it is the one true God that they worship. He said, Jews know whom we worship. But as you pointed out, I feel that, what, either if it is going to be the Samaritan woman who is looking at the object of worship, or Nicodemus who is looking at the object of worship, something was missing in both their cases. What, the object of worship was wrong in case of a Samaritan woman, but Nicodemus, even though the object of worship is the one true God, that is the Father himself, but his act of worship, or there was something that was missing. That, I think, that was what Christ was talking here. The Father is seeking the worshippers to be of a certain cadre. Can you explain more on that?
I love the way Jesus spoke to her. And he did not present an ecumenical message. And he didn't say that what you are worshipping is also right and what we are worshipping is also right. Sometimes in fear, wanting to win the person, we can begin to present an ecumenical message. And he was very clear and he did not mince words. And he said, salvation is of the Jews and you do not know what you are worshipping.
Yes.
Just think about that kind of a conversation you having in the soul winning, that you are saying that, yes, Jesus is the only God. And that is how Christ spoke. And the second part is Jesus Christ never preached an exclusive message. He didn't say salvation is only for the Jews. And he said salvation is for all, because he is talking to a Samaritan lady. And that is the first comment that I wanted to make. And there are three musts that you will see in John chapter 3 and John chapter 4. The first must is John chapter 3, verse 7, you must be born again. Right. The second must, you have 7 verses later in John chapter 3, verse 14. The Son of Man must be lifted up. Right. And you have the third must. It is really a big must in 4 verse 24 that must worship in spirit and truth. And the entire conversation of worship began because she was talking about this mountain and that mountain. Sometimes in our worship, we can have a mental block that I have to worship in this place only when I come to the church on Sunday morning and not on the road or during my difficult times. And we can actually separate God in our physical boundaries. Right. So, but Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 that, so don't you know that your body is the temple of a living God? So this physical boundaries kind of limited her, but Jesus Christ presented the truth that God is spirit. He is present everywhere. He is not present on that mountain and this mountain. And the first thing that Jesus presents to her is God is spirit. I mean, you can put your hands up in an aeroplane, and you can put your hands up as you are waiting, or even in your kitchen, you can put your hands up. And that kind of liberty and that kind of a freedom is being given by the finished work of Christ on the cross. And may this physical boundary not, or Sunday is the day of worship, and not block your mind. That is what Christ was saying, that God is spirit and he is present everywhere. And that is one point that I want us to see there. And the second point is you must worship in spirit and truth. And you need to know that the spirit isn't dead. Right? Ephesians chapter 2, verse 1, when you are an unbeliever, you are dead in your sins. And only when the spirit is made alive can there be worship. Right? So Jesus was talking about that, so spiritual rebirth, as he was talking about the rebirth to Nicodemus, and you must be born again. When we are born again, I mean, the spirit is made alive. That's when you kind of like put your hand up and say, Lord, you are God. You are an amazing God. That part comes alive. So the third point that I want to see is man is a trinity, right? He is made up of a body, soul, and the spirit. Sometimes I can actually have the entire worship in the body, right? All kinds of things and moving up and down and all, but it has not gone into the realm of the spirit, and that is not worship. Or sometimes it could also be entirely based on my feeling that so feel good factor, and that is also not the worship. But Jesus Christ was talking about so has it come in the spirit, right? So that kind of a worship that he is talking about. And one of the great verse that I love is Philippians chapter 3, verse 3. You know what worship is? Apostle Paul is saying worship is putting no confidence in the flesh. We are the true circumcision, and we worship God in spirit by putting no confidence in the flesh. And we present our bodies as a living sacrifice. And then Apostle Paul says this is a true act of worship. And then he says, mine needs to be renewed. So only when the truth is given, and only when I know that I am He and the Messiah, and I am saved by someone who has given his own life sacrificially on the cross, and I just lift my hands and I see the worth of me, which is equal to the blood of God, and I put my hand up, and that is a true act of worship, and man must worship in spirit and truth.
Wow. What I love about seeing, the way God God desires a worship is also a man who has recognized his very, very emptiness, and also that, his unworthiness, and the one who has made him worthy.
Yes.
I think in that gratitude, and also recognizing the fact that, what, the value, the high value that is placed on him or her, what eventually causes a spirit of worship. I think that brings glory to God.
Yes.
Contrary to what devil does. The devil, he is like a hard task master. If he is the object of worship, he demands worship. In that demand, there is no mercy. There is no, there's only cruelty.
Yes.
But it's beautiful to see the kindness, it's like it's from us. It is born within, and it's not demanded of us.
Yes.
And that's beautiful.
Yeah. So we have a temptation, or we have a inclination towards limiting God, and like Jacob, so God was in this place, I did not know it. Right? Can I say that God is here and I missed him? I could have worshipped him. So may I not bind him with respect to the boundary, because where there is spirit, there is liberty.
Wow. Yes. Yes, you know what? The other thing that amazed me in this chapter is, I think this is like it's a loaded chapter. Even Christ speaks about missions, where he is telling that he is talking about harvest. He's telling to the disciples, don't say yet 4 months and then comes harvest in verse 35. But I say to you, lift up your eyes, look to the fields. And then verse 37, he even specifically says, for in this case, the saying is true, one sows, another reaps. And I sent you to reap that for which you have not labored. I see here that the concept of missions is so ingrained here, which I am not able to see. Maybe, you could throw more light on that. But one thing that amazed me is to see the attitude of this woman who was set free. She was set free, and the joy of being set free by God and tasting the love of God, made her so unstoppable that she ran and she almost, soul won the whole village. And then she brings them to Christ. Similar to, in Mark 5, the Gerasenes demoniac who gets saved, and then like he says, Lord, I want to follow you. And Christ says, go and tell to the people and it says he went off and told the whole of Decapolis, about what the Lord had done. So he did his initial sowing part. But the beauty is, what amazes me is, it's not that she had to have certain qualifications, like, okay, you need to know a portion of the Bible or a most of the Bible to be a preacher, like, in terms of, going and inviting, even though I want to balance saying that, yes, a proper biblical education is much needed for us to know the heart of God, but to see the freedom and the liberty she exercised, outwins her to go and win out these people.
Wow, super. This I have to say, it is a cry of a new birth. Right.
Wow.
Recently, I was learning about when the baby is born and comes out of the mother's womb, there are some changes that are taking place. First change is the eye that was adjusted to darkness in the womb of the mother. When it comes out, the eye gets adjusted to the light.
Wow.
And the second change that takes place when the baby is born, and the blood that was flowing through the umbilical cord, now the heart must pump the blood, and that source is cut off. And similarly, the lungs, the air gets into the lungs, and the baby begins to cry. The first thing that the doctors and the nurses would want to see for the newborn baby is that no, it's the cry of the baby. Right, so the spiritual birth brings in a cry,
Wow.
and this has happened to this lady, and this lady is kind of like running to the city, and she is not conscious of her reputation anymore, and she's crying like the changes that are taking place. So even they say that the baby that is in the mother's womb is about 100 degree Fahrenheit, and when it comes and it goes 20 degree lesser, and it gets adjusted to the temperature, and she runs and she says that, come and see a man who has told about me and everything about me. Is he not the Christ? And I would say that is the cry of the baby.
Wow.
Right? And so we want to see like how the doctors and the nurses wanted to see, and we want to see. And that may not happen to everyone. Look at Nicodemus and to whom he spoke. And I don't see Nicodemus going to every single Pharisee and saying that, oh, come and see. And even when John writes about Nicodemus in John chapter 19, verse 39, he presents him as a secret believer who comes to embalm the body of Jesus Christ. And the first thing that I see in her is the cry of the new birth. And secondly, like how we spoke about the misconception about worship with respect to the mental blocks and boundaries and how I look at and on the day. And secondly, there is a misconception about soul winning also. So Jesus, imagine, I don't think the Christ, the disciples of Christ would have won the Samaritans. To them, Samaritans are by race, they cannot be born again. Right? Sometimes the racism can kind of like block my mind, and I can say that I don't think there is going to be a harvest there. Right? So it happened to Peter, and Peter was given 3 times the dream in Acts chapter 10. And for him, it was very, very hard that the Gentiles could get saved. If Peter was thinking after the death of Christ in that manner, think about, do you think that the disciples would have gone after the Samaritans?
No.
And they would not even say that 4 months later. They will say that absolutely no harvest in that place.
Yes.
That is the greatest misconception. Why? Even sometimes I go to soul winning, I see a big made man, and I think that, oh, this guy is going to be very proud, and I don't think that he is going to receive the gospel. And I would say that maybe after 10 months there is a harvest. And that kind of a misconception that I can have as a soul winner. And sometimes it is easy for God to speak to the Cornelius, and it is very difficult for God to prepare a believer for soul winning. And Jesus Christ is saying that, don't you ever say in your mind 4 months. And I understood that 4 months also. I used to travel from my hometown to the school by bus. And there is a village called Sitambati. And in that village, they will say that 3 crops. Right, 12 months, 3 crops divided by 12 divided by 3, 4 months. Right, so they plant a crop and they wait for 4 months and then they harvest. And second crop wait for 4 months and then they harvest. Third crop wait for 4 months. So generally in our mind, now only I have sowed and I have to get the harvest after 4 months. No. What Jesus Christ is saying is there is someone who has already sowed. Right, so before 4 months or whatever the time, and the harvest is ready. That is what he is saying. Like, don't think that when you go into the field, now I am going to sow, and after 4 months, God is going to give me the harvest. That is another big misconception. I have to be the sower and I have to be the reaper. Is it possible that I go into the city as a reaper, not as a sower? Someone else has sowed.
Yes.
Right? What did Jesus Christ say here? The sower will also be happy and the reaper will also be happy. It is possible that I have sowed and I have not reaped, and I could be very sad. Right? But Jesus Christ is talking about a harvest and bringing in a lot of misconception into light, and he wants us to be very, very clear with the fact that no, so the sower could also be happy without him reaping, and the reaper need not to wait for 4 months for him to sow and then get the harvest. And the racism or big build, or suppose if I mention a country which is terrorism oriented, and what comes to your mind is like, oh, there is no harvest there. I wouldn't even say that 4 months from now when the harvest, I would have come to the conclusion, absolutely, there is no harvest. And Jesus Christ is saying to the disciples, look, Samaritans, don't you ever come to the conclusion that there is no harvest. Or say that I have to wait for 4 months. And this lady is bringing a huge group of men from the city, and the disciples are totally shocked. And finally, they say, you are the savior of the world, and there was harvest in plenty. It is a beautiful missions message to all of us to drive out any single misconception that can be found in our minds. We have come to the end of the GPT, Grace People's Talk, and today we could talk about two questions. One question is concerning the misconception of worship, another question is concerning the misconception of harvest. What a beautiful lesson that this lady has to teach, and what a beautiful lesson that Christ has to teach to us. And continue to watch GPT, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.